I think that's a good segue in to the territories and the booking of the territories. Most smaller territories, and I'm talking about Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, had a 3-month booking window. And they would know 12 weeks from now, we're going to end. Dick Slater and Ricky Steamboat's going to end in a bunkhouse match in all the towns, and they would book themselves backwards so that they knew where they were going to go. They gave the wrestlers all the, they knew what their ending was. They knew how. So basically, it started out as an angle. So and then it became a program, and then they had the blow off, which was called the blow off. That was the basic deal, and every territory had the same thing. WWF had a 6-month run. Theirs would always run 6 months because they wouldn't run the towns a lot. What do you think that the people who are promoting wrestling today, and I'm talking about the independents, do you think they know the concept of what wrestling was? Do you think they understand the booking concept of it has to have an end first, and then you have a middle, and then there's do you think they understand angle, program, blow off?
Some do. You've got guys, Q-Ball Carmichael up in Carolinas. He's not running anything right now, but he did for years. And we share the same philosophy, about the business. Rudy Gonzalez is running out in Texas. He's an older guy. He's been around. He uses that same style. That's what I do. And I'm telling you, guys are amazed when I set them down and I start laying out, what we're doing, 6, 8 shows down the road with them. And they're like, well, how'd you do this? And I'm like, well, how do you not? I mean, your dad is the one who set me down and showed me this, wrote it out, showed me how it worked. And, and that's just, I never thought about doing anything other than that because it works.
Well, I mean, that's basic writing. If you're writing a book, you're going to have the end first. And then you're gonna know how you're gonna start it. You know how you're gonna end it. And then back then the wrestlers would fill in the middle. I mean, the wrestlers would actually fill in the middle because they knew they were going to end here, so they knew what they needed to work towards. I mean, there may be a 4-week, just a little bit of more of an angle to just push it more. Then there may be another one 8 weeks, but then on that 12th week it was going to be the blow off, and they tried to really step them out so not everything was ending at the same time. And today, unfortunately, I'll notice when they do something, they end it on a month and they have to start right back over again without having anything to come back with. And I think that would help them if they would stretch some of the stuff out, not do it all, and end it all in one pay-per-view. Because I don't think every match has to be a main event match. I don't think it ever has been able to. I was there till 1996 in a small way, just taking care of their developmental towns with my father, and I think it really came down to, you can have all the money in the world, but if you don't have the wrestling knowledge to be able to do it, you won't make it. I don't care if you have billions of dollars; it doesn't matter. All Elite Wrestling can have billions of dollars, but if you don't put some wrestling knowledge to it, or at least, hey, you don't even have to have wrestling knowledge, but you got to at least have good writing knowledge, and you've got to know what you're doing. You're either a comedy or you're a drama. Don't be both. And I think WCW, they'd have guys, and they didn't respect the business. I remember they say, that's funny, but it wasn't meant to be funny. And then you would talk to the people and say, it's not supposed to be funny. This is not a joke. Because we didn't take wrestling as a joke. We took wrestling serious. It was not a joke to us, and that's the reason. By the way, that's the reason we got fired, and we wasn't there because we told them that wrestling was not a joke. We took wrestling serious, and we took the wrestling fans serious, and they did not. Most WCW officials did not like the fans, and we had a major problem with that, and told them without the fans, you're nothing. And for some reason, they didn't even care if you told them that. What do you think happened at WCW?
Well, what was the point from Vince's side of it? Why? I beat them. I've already showed that our product's better. There was no real upside to it. I wish that they could have played that storyline out a little bit better and a little bit longer. But ultimately, there was no future.
Yeah, I think Vince knew that it was abused so badly, especially at the end when they were putting championships on. Well, whoever that guy was they put the championship on. I can't remember who it was now. Arquette, was it Dave Arquette or something Arquette? Yeah. They put the title on him, and they just did so many stupid things that you're never going to come back from. Because then again, WCW were trying to tell people there's some believability there, and I don't think they should ever change the product. I think that's one of the problems. They changed the product, and it's just Vince's product, and used all his people, and really and truly, I think in that respect, it made WCW look bad because you couldn't do it on your own. You had to take Vince's product and Vince's wrestlers to make it mean something, and I think Vince knew that. Let me see a couple other people. Here is Susan Renee. Hey, thank you so much, Susan. Thank you for coming on. And she agreed. I'm a little behind, so I'm hoping whatever we talked about.
Everything. She needs to agree.
There you go. That's the way Vince McMahon wants you to do. Agree with anything or you'll be fired.
And don't sneeze.
Yes, Susan Renee. Not all stories have to end each time there's a pay-per-view. Give us the story. A slow burn story and carries on. Real played out rivalries that build over some time. Because what do people pay for? They don't really care about the wrestling match. They really don't. No. They care about when Wrestling 2 was in Atlanta, they cared about Wrestling 2. They built him where they loved him. So when the superstar came to town, they didn't have to have what Dave Mezzer said it was 5-star matches because the matches meant nothing. Yeah. They were good to have, and if you had a great match, that was great. But Superstar Wrestling 2 is what drew it in there, and now they had great matches. Now, I'm not saying they didn't have great matches, but it didn't matter. Les Thornton and somebody on the first match could have the greatest match on the card. But just because Les Thornton had the greatest matches on the card didn't mean he could draw you money because he had no personality to go with that great wrestling. And so it's always about personalities. Tommy Rich and Buzz Sawyer drew money because you put those two personalities together, and it's all about personality and stories. Now, you don't want wrestlers that are horrible by no stretch. You don't want Van Hammer. If anybody remembers him out there.
I do.
So yeah. And I think she's right. You have to get people engaged in the story about why do these two hate each other, the backstory like the old days. And I think that's common. And I think there needs to be a differentiation between heels and baby faces. You need to know this shades of gray. That just really doesn't work because you're never going to. You can have a couple of those matches, but you can't have them on a daily basis. What do you think about that, Jack?
Yeah, I think one of the things we're missing, not just in storytelling from what we were to what we are now, is just that emotional investment from the crowd. It just don't seem like most of the characters today, and it's not their fault. I mentioned this, when we were talking beforehand, they're just doing what they're told, but the emphasis is on the company, not those individual wrestlers anymore. And now kids, they pick up, they like the way somebody looks, they like the way somebody dresses, and that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. But adults want to be emotionally involved, invested in those characters. That's why we still go to Star Wars. That's why we still love Indiana Jones and Rocky, and Rambo. I mean, we identify with those characters, and we want to see them, make those comebacks. And I think that's missing a lot today, and
I think that's true. Kevin Tubbs said you have to care about one and hate the other, and they have to be able to perform. Hey, I agree. I think it's important for them to be able to wrestle, but it's not 50% did they have to be able to perform because Jim Duggan wasn't the greatest wrestler in the world. But for some reason, Jim Duggan in Louisiana, he connected with the people and really and truly had some really bad matches. Now, that was on the main event. Punches looked pretty bad, but he was over. He was over for some reason, and I never really saw why. We were there for a year and a half. I never really saw why Jim Duggan was over. I know why the Rock and Roll Express was over, because them and the Midnight Express had some of the greatest matches in the history of the wrestling business. And then when Ted DiBiase worked against Hacksaw Jim Duggan, spectacular matches. I mean, they had some good matches. They didn't draw what they had done the first time. And this was 1985, I believe. They came back and Duggan got beat up in the parking lot, and they did something like that, which was another one of them unbelievable things that happened in wrestling. So they were doing them back then too, folks. And it did not draw. And unfortunately, the Dusty Rhodes Ole Anderson angle we talked about before, which was a great angle, really never drew the money that it did the first time they did it, because they jumped Dusty Rhodes in the parking lot. It never did draw the money the second time. I think it's because it made Dusty look really, really bad. I think it made him look stupid to be in the ring with 6 guys that were somebody that didn't like him in the past. So I don't think it helped Dusty out at all. And that was very surprising to us that he didn't draw. The Roddy Piper, Bob Armstrong in Georgia never drew the money it was supposed to, because people didn't know Roddy Piper was a professional wrestler. So they figured, well, Bob's going to kill him. There's a couple other things come up. At the end of the day, professional wrestling is storytelling, played out in a square circle and solved with physicality. Hey, by the way, that's exactly what they say on WWE's. So if you're investing in WWE, they actually say that on there if you want to invest in their product. Israel Napier, WCW had great talent. They never knew how to use them. They had people in the wrong places. And you're right, they had people that didn't care about the business. Your older guys had compassion for the business. Today's different day, different time. I agree. Don't you agree with that, Jack?
I do.
Oh, there's old Tim Horner. Hey, Tim, how you doing,
brother?
We need to get you on here, and we need to talk to you. We're doing a show on Continental Championship Wrestling every Thursday, and I think Mitch Lucas that is the host of that, but we do it every week, and we would like to talk to you about matches you had with Tom Pritchard, Roy Lee Welch, and a bunch of others. Tim Horner said there is no true heel or babyface anymore. Wrestling has always been good versus bad. It's just hard to distinguish who is who. And Tim Horner, you are exactly right. They just need. Let me tell you, when we used to use Jack, you knew he was a bad guy because he did bad guy stuff. He would choke you with something. He would hit you with something. He would cheat, and if he was the manager, he would really cheat during the match to get somebody over. And I think that's very important. Tim, thank you so much for coming on here and telling us about the wrestling business. There's no one that knows wrestling better than Tim Horner. Let's move on to owners for just a second. And I want to talk owners, and then I'm going to bring Mitch on, but I want to talk owners just for a second, and I want to talk about Jim Barnett. It's really because he was somebody that for years was the man in professional wrestling. There was no one any bigger than Jim Barnett in the professional wrestling business. And this was what, and I'm talking, these are the guys that came in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and there was a change of ownership that came up later on, but this was the core thing about owners back then. If Jim Barnett saw something, like, for instance, Tommy Rich was his lead babyface for many years. I mean, for years in Georgia Championship Wrestling, from probably 78 until 83, and until Barnett was read out of there. But he was his lead person. And this is what he would say. Let's say he had a program with a superstar at Drew, and then the next time he had a program with Ken Patera. So Ken Patera was there, and it wasn't drawn with Tommy Rich and Ken Patera. Yeah. So Jim Barnett come up to Dad. He said, "My boy, we're going to have to get rid of Ken Patera." He says, "Well, it ain't drawing Tommy Rich's on it yet." You think, yeah, but he did draw. He did draw. So let's get rid of Kenny Patera. And, I can't remember who was booking at the time. And I know they told him, quit putting Ken Patera in the matches with Tommy Rich. And they didn't do it. And they were also fired along with Ken Patera. That was the ownership of the companies then. It didn't have nothing to do whether they liked you, whether they were your friend. It had to whether or not you could put butts in those seats. And if you couldn't, I don't care what. If Tommy Rich could not have put people in them seats, no matter what people have said about Tommy Rich and Jim Barnett, never happened. That never, we were there. That never happened. That never took place. He didn't get the world title shot because of that. They were just trying to give Georgia a boost to help it draw. It had nothing to do with anything, and they knew it was going to happen. All the NWA people knew it was happening. Dad drove down with the Harley race that night. All that stuff, everybody knew. The wrestlers did. No wrestler knew it. The only people who knew it was Harley Race and my dad, and Tommy only knew it that night. He didn't know it ahead of time that he was going to get the title. He knew it that night. So, but do you think that owners today, and maybe Vince does this, does he ever look at what's going on in the arenas when the arenas were run? Does he go to the arenas, or does he have anybody he sends to the arenas to look at the matches and say, hey, Joe's getting over? Because Jim Barnett would do that. He would say, "Oh my boy, that Jerry Roberts getting over a little bit." Yeah, because back in the territory days, they would see a guy on that first match and they go, "Okay, he needs to go to the second match," and then they'd be in the booking committee and say, "Okay, he needs to go to the third match." And before you know it, that's how Tommy Rich got there. Tommy Rich didn't get there because he got there because they watched how the people reacted to him. And that's the reason he got to that point that he got to, because otherwise they wouldn't have gave him a chance. If people were just sitting there on their thumbs and going to the concession stand. I remember Jacques Rougeau. He was wrestling in Southeastern Championship Wrestling, and we really didn't mean to do this. We were just telling the truth. But he was going against a guy named Vic Raines at the time, Southeastern Championship Wrestling, maybe 1983. And he came to us after the match. He rode with us. We were living in Pensacola at the time. He came back to us. He said, hey, boys, how was my match tonight? And we said, oh, man, I don't know how your match was. I was in the line at the concession stand. And Dad looked over at him and said, well, I guess that tells you what your match was like. I'll never forget that. And I don't think it was Jacques Rougeau's fault. I think Vic Raines just wasn't going to get over it.